I'm Craig Tomashoff. We're here today to do an interview with Bill Nye, aka the Science Guy, September 5th, 2012, for the Academy of America, for the Archive of American Television.
The archives.
Archives.
It's like a library kind of thing. That's one thing it's not, I gotta say. It's inherently not.
All right, well, let's begin with what was your name at birth?
William Sanford Nye. That's so I'm given to understand.
And where were you born?
I was born actually not in Washington, D.C., in Bethesda, Maryland, but it's Washington, D.C. I mean, I'm a Nationals fan.
Where did you grow up?
In Washington, in the city limits of Washington.
And your father's name, we'll start with your father. What was his name? What did he do?
Edwin Darby Nye. So is my brother, same name. So my dad was Ned Nye.
And what did he do?
He sold advertising to banks. So his company started or was involved somehow early on with the Bank AmeriCard, which we all know now as the Visa. Same color, same font.
And how about your mom? What did she do? What was her name and what did she do?
Jacqueline Jenkins, and she worked in for the Navy on the Enigma code during World War II. She had some sort of big deal security clearance, and then she worked for many government. She was a bureaucrat. Worked for several government agencies. These all have fabulous acronyms. But I think her favorite job was working again for the Navy at the David Taylor Model Basin, which is where they test ship models, ship hulls. And I think that was her favorite job. But she went on to get a doctorate in education, strangely enough.
So now was science and education important to them and your grandparents as well?
It was very important, yeah. Education is very important.
What about science?
The science is, so hang on a second. Uval.
We left off with. Okay. So go the traits from your parents. What do you think you inherited from your parents and your grandparents, who I understand were in science or science involved?
My parents were very supportive of science. They were great believers in science. My father referred to himself as Ned Nye, boy scientist, many times. My mother was a cryptographer. She got Cryptography magazine for a long time. And my grandfather was an organic chemist, and my uncle, my mother's brother, whom I admired very much, was a geologist, and my father's brother was a mechanical engineer. So we go way back with this stuff.
Is that what instilled the love of science in you to begin with? Because it seems like it was part of the family.
Yeah, it's something you accept, that you grow up with. I grew up playing with my grandfather's glassware. So in those days, like a modern chemist can use software called ChemDraw. It's like PowerPoint, but it's for doing molecules. Well, my grandfather could blow his own glass. It was a skill from that time. Like I can use a slide rule, something that many people don't need to do anymore. So that's 2 bells, so it's 0900 if we were on a ship. So you grow up with this stuff, and it's empowering. It's what you want to do.
Do you remember the first, I don't know if it was an experiment or something, that like the first thing that you did scientifically that made you go, yeah, I like this?
Well, there were 2 things. I talk about this. The first was vinegar and baking soda. It really is an amazing thing. You mix a solid and a liquid, and you get a gas. And it has entropy going, it's all there. And then the other thing, I used to watch bees. I used to watch bumblebees. I just think that is such a big animal. It's tiny wings. How is it possible? And then I read in Ripley's Believe It or Not that according to aerodynamic theory, bees cannot fly. And even as a little kid, that's not a very good theory. I mean, the bees are doing fine. And so this gets you in the habit of questioning things, which is really important in science and inquiry.
Now, what about humor, since that's the other part of what you've done? Was that a part of your family as well?
Oh, yes. My parents were both very funny. I remember them, it was important to them. I don't know if they were funny, but humor was important to them. I remember my mother had some guy come to work in her office whose last name was Deweestick, or Deweesticks. And so they spent, I don't know, 2 days composing a limerick that had Deweesticks in it. And I remember the computerer's key stick was the rhyme. And this is when computers were this sort of innovation, this new thing. And it was important. Other people would not bother with such things, and or didn't seem to. And my father's there's all these pictures of him smoking 3 pipes at once and playing the ukulele. He was not silly, but very, very funny. And they would work hard at. Remember on New Year's Eve, people would come to the door. They had a party. Oh, by the way, New Year's Eve and the name NYE. NYE is an acronym for New Year's Eve, NYE. And we had rigged up this thing. It was big fun for Bill, the little kid, where they would dump confetti on people when they least expected it. And it was, so funny. But these are things it was important to them.
Did you remember the first joke you ever told?
Boy, I'm sure it was a knock-knock joke. And it probably was the one, Orange, you glad I didn't say banana. It was probably, because that's so funny. Still, this stands the test of time.
Now, do you have any siblings?
Yeah, I have an older brother and older sister. And they were very influential. My sister was a pretty good student. My brother had an outstanding physics teacher. And that physics teacher affected me, even though I didn't take physics from him. That's a claim. I'm making this claim.
Now, did you have a goal of what you wanted to be when you grew up at that point, or no?
Well, I got a job in a bike shop. And that's when I realized that there are people who design bicycles, mechanical engineers. And that's when I decided that that's probably what I wanted to do, be a mechanical engineer.
At what age was that?
The 14, 15, that summer, yeah.
Now, were there other activities, like kind of leisure time things that kind of interested you, things you did for fun?
Well, I rode my bike a lot, and I played a lot of Frisbee, using that as a verb. I mean, as a generic term. Flying disc, threw a lot of flying discs. And we shot model rockets and flew kites and all these important things.
Did you ever try to pretend to blow stuff up or anything with that?
Oh, yeah, we blew stuff up. Very diligent blowing things up. And the older boys would get fireworks from states where they were legal to purchase, something like some exotic place like South Carolina or something. And you'd blow stuff up and you'd light the firecracker, drop it down the sewer top. Very popular to put the firecrackers on the wings of balsa wood aircraft. Get the balsa wood plane flying and just have it explode in midair. Something very satisfying about that. Not sure why.
Was that the moment when you went, science, that would be fun to do?
Oh, yeah. Well, explosives are kind of magical. I mean, you have this very small packet and it has all this energy. You can do things. You can make cans tip over. And you heard all these stories about guys who got blinded and blew their hands off. And I said, I never got that close.
And no accidents for you then?
No, not with that stuff.
But now, were there any teachers along the way who influenced you, helped you?
Yeah. Well, I was talking about Mrs. McGonigal the other day, whom I had for both first and second grade. And she showed us a model of an oasis where the water flows underground and then comes up over here. I thought that was the coolest thing. It was an aquarium with sand in it. It was pretty great. And then she had this explanation for the disappearance of the ancient dinosaurs. And she said, well, their brains were small, so rabbits and rats took all their food and they died. And she knew that was just not satisfactory. She knew that although this is what was presented to her to present to us, she knew that it was lame, no good. And then, sure enough, many years later, in my lifetime, people discovered the crater off Chicxulub, Mexico. And so the modern theory of the demise of the ancient dinosaurs is much more reasonable, big impactor. And now I work at the Planetary Society, and one of our little things is to try to keep the Earth from getting hit with an asteroid. Coincidence? Perhaps not. The asteroid impact, by the way, everybody, is the only preventable natural disaster. So think about joining the Planetary Society.
Did you watch a lot of TV growing up? I don't know if you had favorite shows, and then
Well,
in particular science-related.
I watched shows that you were allowed to watch. You weren't supposed to spend all day watching television. But I remember a show called Discovery 65, hosted by Bill Bixby. And I think it was both 65 and 66. And this was Gemini spacecraft, Gemini rockets. And I grew up in the city of Washington. So when the astronauts came to town on the back of convertibles, we went downtown and waved to them. And we were caught up in the whole thing along with everybody else. It's very cool. And then I watched the original Star Trek. I mean, and it dates you. My colleagues, people I work with, you can tell how old everybody is by which Star Trek they were enamored, or Star Wars. There's a whole Star Wars contingent. And that was very influential on me because it was about this optimistic future for humankind. And say what you will, I hate people who like Star Trek, fine, but it is an inherently optimistic future. So that was good.
And what about Mr. Wizard?
So Mr. Wizard, that's a good question. So I watched Mr. Wizard diligently. It was not on regularly. Like there was something, you couldn't count on it every week. I remember this was troublesome. And then later in life, I watched his I guess the expression is remake of his old shows that was made in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, I think. And then I had lunch with him eventually, and that was quite cool.
What was that? I mean, that's got to be kind of like either meeting an idol, or what was that experience?
Well, it was great. It was wonderful. And his wife Fern said, Don, his name's Don Herbert, was very happy to have somebody to whom he could pass the torch. That was quite gratifying.
I wonder if he was aware of your work. I mean,
Oh yeah. It was at the Science Teacher Convention, National Science Teachers Association, and the Bill Nye the Science Guy show won 18 Emmys. I won 7 Emmys, and I'm very proud of those, and it's great. But I also won the Science Advocacy Award from the actually the Council for Elementary Science International, which is part of the National Science Teachers Association. And Don Herbert and I each won that. That was very gratifying. It was very gratifying.
Now, getting back to it, like when you were a kid, and what kind of kid were you? Were you the class clown? Were you the science geek?
I was not as funny as other guys. I wanted to be. Eric Seltzer was a lot funnier. And I look back now on all these theories of or speculation about birth month, and I was always the youngest kid in the class. I was born in November, and so I went to kindergarten when I was 4. And I think nowadays people would have held me back. So I was always, I thought about this a lot the last couple of years, so this is on my mind. It may or may not be true, but I spent a lot of time trying to catch up. And I think it's also reasonable that it gives you, even from that early age, it gives you a youthful perspective. I don't know if that's true, but it could be.
And so now, where did you go to college?
Well, that was a mistake on their part. I went to Cornell University, and I think that was some sort of clerical error in the admissions department. And then there I was, and what are they going to do? I had never seen Cornell. It was, in U.S. football, you'd say it was a Hail Mary pass. I just applied to Cornell because this guy 2 years ahead of me who had the same physics teacher said, you should apply to Cornell. I think okay. And then turned out Cornell had girls. It was an engineering school with women. Like, that was an innovation in those days. It was huge. Big fan.
Of girls.
Yes.
Very helpful. Now, Carl Sagan was teaching there.
So I had Carl Sagan for astronomy, so I didn't take astronomy till I was a senior, and I didn't need to take it. It was an elective, and the algebra in that class was for me very straightforward. I had taken 6 semesters or whatever it is, years of physics, and so, but the insights, the ideas were fantastic, and changed my life. So I was very much affected by Carl Sagan. Then I got on the mailing list for the Planetary Society and became a member of the Planetary Society. When Carl Sagan died, I spoke at his memorial service. Then I got on the board of directors of the Planetary Society, then vice president. Now I'm the CEO of the Planetary Society. So Carl Sagan's influence or legacy is the reason I'm doing what I'm doing now.
Is that when you mentioned it changed your life? Is that what you mean by it changing your life?
It changed my life. Well, it just gives you a planetary perspective, a global perspective. And so in those days, in the late 1970s, Carl Sagan was doing the lectures that became the show Cosmos, or the series Cosmos. So when I watched the series, it was the stuff I'd already heard him say. Like, he had been honing that for years before he went to make the TV show. It's great. Because then he had the coolest props. Instead of just telling the story of the librarian at Alexandria, he went to Egypt and got the wide shot, as we say in the business. It was cool.
Now, how much of like what you learned from him, just presentation-wise, fed into the Science Guy? Was there a lot of influence from him when you got to the TV end of what you were doing?
Well, I don't know. Maybe not directly. Just the importance of the routine, like second funniest, third funniest, first funniest, like second most compelling, third most compelling, first most compelling. I probably got that from him, but we are two different people with two different sensibilities, especially our relationship to humor or comedy writing. But I will say this. So I had started to do this educational television when I was living in Seattle at the NBC affiliate, King TV. Seattle's in King County, so NBC is KING TV. I had this deal where I was talking about mechanical things mostly. And I went to my 10th college reunion. And I made calls and wrote a letter and this and that to Carl Sagan's assistant, who I'm pretty sure was named Olivia. Pretty sure. Geez, I hope that's right. Oh, we may be interchanging with another professor's wife, Olive. That aside, I made arrangements to meet with him. And he was very busy at that time. He was extremely popular now. He'd done Cosmos. He'd written about nuclear winter. He was a controversial and influential figure. He was one of the original board or directors of the Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal. And he was a big deal. And he said, focus on pure science. Don't do technology. And the verb he used, kids resonate to pure science. And so I did. So that minute and a half was very influential. It was very cool of him. And it was very cool of his assistant to make it happen. Because he was a celebrity at that point.
Let's say now, I mean, getting to Seattle, how did you, when and what kind of brought you to Seattle?
Oh, so I was graduated from Cornell in mechanical engineering, and companies that make stuff need engineers. People are continually retiring. It's the nature. It's hard to get, but every year people retire, so you need new people. So I was recruited by Boeing. I was recruited by McDonnell Douglas, Boeing. Later on, I talked with Bertia. These are all airplane companies. And Boeing really struck me as the most interesting. Furthermore, it was in the Pacific Northwest. And I, as a young guy, had always dreamed of climbing mountains. I met some guys in junior high or middle school that were really into rock climbing. They would go to this rock climbing camp every year. And I thought that was cool. So I got a job in Seattle, and I stayed there a long time. It's a very nice town. At least when I was there, Seattle was coming of age. And I often say Seattle saved my life. I mean, we wouldn't have the Science Guy show. We wouldn't have any of that if I hadn't gone to Seattle.
Now, was it just because of the atmosphere of it? Or?
Well, so it's the 13th market in television. We're on television. What's Seattle now? Is it 11th? Anyway, it's below top 10, but it's not in the 50s. It's not. and don't get me wrong, I love North Carolina, but it's not. It's it's medium. So the guy, the head of the television station, could kind of do whatever he wanted. And he said, "Oh, I want to have a comedy show." This guy, Chuck Jones, I guess. He said, "I want to have a comedy show." So he did. And the guy who won the Seattle comedy competition was the host, a guy named Ross Schaefer, who's still a dear friend of mine. And I would see him at comedy clubs because I started doing stand-up comedy after I won the Steve Martin Lookalike contest in Seattle. I did not go any farther than that. I won one event, and then I was eliminated after that. And the guy who won the national one kind of looked like Steve Martin, which I didn't have that. And he was from Nashville. He could play the banjo. Wow, serious biz. Anyway, I started submitting jokes to the show, and a few of them were okay. And then I quit my job, October 3rd, 1986, roughly.
Now, what made you want to kind of get into TV? Or were you watching the show and going, I want to do that, or you were just doing stand-up around town?
Well, I found I liked being on stage. It's really compelling. I mean, when you get a bunch of strangers to laugh at your ideas, it makes you feel good. There's probably, I'm sure books have been written about some sick, twisted relationship with my great-grandmother or something, but it makes you feel good when you make people laugh. And also, I was brought up with a lot of focus on grammar and words. My father was very proud. He would write messages in iambic pentameter, in 5-beat verse. Dad, really, And so, when you get to the point where you can craft a sentence that's funny, it's gratifying. And I think a lot about Steve Martin and so on. But I remember this. You're reading a story, so this is hearsay. But apparently, he was dating. Can we say dating? Are we allowed to say dating? He was dating Bernadette Peters, and she quoted one of his jokes, but she didn't quite get it right. So he instantly, or he felt compelled to correct her. And I really sympathize with that he has taken every word and arranged it just so. So if you screw them up just a little bit, it doesn't work. It's not as funny. And I just think about it. We're digressing a little, but Steve Martin's thing about, I make my living with language. People who can't express themselves, people who don't have a way with words, sort of have way, I guess. Guys, I'm sorry. Have way is the funniest thing anybody's ever written. I think, oh my goodness, I exaggerate. It's pretty good. And it just takes discipline. If you don't say have way, it's not good. All right. So I started submitting jokes. At this point in our story, I was working not at Boeing, but at another aerospace company in Seattle. At that time was called Sunstrand Data Control. Now it's Honeywell, the people who make navigation systems for airplanes. And I was working for some people that were obsessed with making money every quarter, every 3 months. Now, you can do that. I think, I'm speculating, these guys read all sorts of business advice books. They might have had MBAs. They may have been going back to school to get masters in business administration. And you can make a profit every quarter if you are making a commodity, like a soft drink or paper towels is another example. I've done some jobs for Scott Paper and stuff. You can work on it every quarter, but if you're going to make a new laser gyro navigation system for business jets that's a quarter of the size of the existing ones, let me think, a fifth of the size of the existing ones, that takes a few minutes. And so I just thought they were just spinning their wheels, sending everybody in a circle. And this was all the rage in U.S. business, to have this go-getter approach and so on. And so I just decided that what we really needed to do was affect the future. And I'm not kidding, it was a conscious decision. I wanted to influence children so that we would have a more scientifically literate future. And it took several years after that.
Was that, I mean, if, when you look at the origin of the Science Guy character persona, would that be the beginning of where that
Well, it
came
was
from?
important to me at this time, and then one thing leads to another. And so Ross Schaefer, the host of the comedy show, which was called Almost Live, a better name than 3 hours old, as we say, was not only the host of this comedy show, he also had the hottest radio show in town, in Seattle. And this, everybody, if you're watching and listening, it was AM radio. AM radio, a music format, the way you would have now an FM station, the way you would have dating ourselves here would be K-Rock or Amp Radio or one of these things, or KISS FM. It was still on AM radio, and so I was listening to it because he was, in a sense, my boss. He's certainly a guy I had to have a good relationship with. So I was listening to his radio show, and somebody called in, and it had to do with the movie Back to the Future. And the answer was this and that, and Ross said such and such, so many gigawatts. So I called him on the air, and they knew who I was, and they let me in, and so it let me through. And I said, Ross, you can say gigawatts, but we prefer gigawatts. And what are you, the science? And yeah. So I ended up calling every day. And then in a writer's meeting, just it was a month and a half later, 6 weeks later, we needed some material. Now, if I can, just for you people of a certain age, you may remember Rita Jenrette. Now, Rita Jenrette was notorious for having had sex on the steps of the U.S. Capitol building. But here's the crazy part. I mean, sex on the Capitol, it's crazy, but it was with her husband. Of all people. Wow, that is out there. That is nutty. So anyway, she had written a book, and she didn't show up. This is in the days when people would actually go from city to city with their books. So we needed 6 or 7 minutes. And then Ross Schaefer said, well, why don't you do that stuff you do at the Science Center? Now, I was a young guy, so I was a United Way big brother, and I was volunteering at the Pacific Science Center, pouring liquid nitrogen around and being entertaining with regard to scientific phenomena, and by means of scientific phenomena. Anyway, he said, you could do that stuff you do at the Science Center. You could be, Bill Nye the Science Guy or something. Well, I got to go. But that was it. That's Ross. That's it. So I did the first Science Guy about the household uses of liquid nitrogen. Because we all have it around. We've all got liquid nitrogen around, sure. So it was funny. And the payoff is where you roast marshmallows in nitrogen, and they turn, instead of happy, puffy, soft, they turn rock hard. And when you chew them, with a little practice, you can get steam to come out of your nose. Really, like this, like down here, more than 30 centimeters, a foot of steam. And it's funny. It works very well with graham crackers. They're porous. But marshmallows are just a funnier object. A marshmallow is a funny thing to turn rock hard.
And that was the first kind of public appearance of Bill Nye?
Yeah, well, that was the first video appearance of the Science Guy. Yeah, so that was 1987. 1987.
So, what was their instant response to it too? So you
Oh,
knew
it's
this
very-
is something. What was the response?
Yeah. Oh, it was really good. It was very good. So we had an audience, I guess, of 100 people, 120 people. And do we have to wait for the plane? You want to wait for the plane? Oh, it's a helicopter. So we had a hearing here in the neighborhood about helicopter noise. And I didn't go because it doesn't bother me that much. I think helicopters are cool. So bring it on. We did, there's 120 people in the audience, and it was very, very well received. So then the Science Guy became this regular bit. But it was based on, so I worked at the Science Center, did all kinds of demonstrations there, liquid nitrogen, pulleys and ropes, some mixing of acids and bases, a lot of electrical demonstrations, or fundamental science, the kind of thing that Mr. Wizard would show you when you watch television. So I had a lot of background in that, and I spent a lot of time then on purpose, diligently, learning the traditional demonstrations, the egg in the milk bottle, the magician pulling the cloth out from under the glasses on the table, the things that look like one will weigh more than the other, but they weigh the same, and one floats and one sinks. I spent a lot of time with that stuff till you get good with it. And then I ended up on every talk show that no one's ever heard of. Certain people have heard of Crook and Chase. I was on Crook and Chase. I was on, Magic Johnson had a show for 5 minutes. I was on there. Chevy Chase had a show for a half hour.
Was this pre-science?
No, this is all going along at once. And so, because I don't know, these people would have me on because there was something, physical activity that was different. And the other thing I would claim is I brought a little something to it. I brought some presence or something. You wanted to watch what happened.
How did it transition from, like, the thing you were doing on Almost Live to becoming the series? Was that you deciding this was something you wanted to really pursue? Or? Well,
there was another, as I say all the time to people, there's no big breaks. They're just breaks. So I was a freelancer working at Almost Live. And this is, I got to tell you, it's a really troublesome thing. I mean, I was an engineer with a job. I mean, I made pretty good money. I mean, for a young guy, I wasn't rich, but I lived very comfortably. I had credit cards and a car and stuff. Then you go to a comedy club and you meet these comedians who just were living, in a cardboard box, and they thought that was the greatest thing ever. I'm not one of those guys. So one of the difficult things was you do the show for 6 weeks, and then you're off for 6 weeks. You're unemployed for 6 weeks. It's really tricky. Well, anyway, here's Almost Live, physically, cubicles. Then right over there is a show called Seattle Today, just a couple body lengths away. Now you don't have to watch Seattle Today to know exactly what happened. There's a male host, a female host. They talked about the issues that interest people who are home at 9 in the morning, who are almost all women. So today, it's the Kitsap High School marching band, breast exams, and the all pizza diet. It's just like so there were 2 producers over there, Jim McKenna and Erin Gottlieb, and Erin's a woman, and they wanted to go into business for themselves with their own production company because they'd been around television and they were doing Seattle Today, and it was all right, but they wanted to do their own thing. So they started their own production company, and one of their first jobs, as I understand it, was to do this thing for the Washington State Department of Ecology. So that's 3 bells. So that's 9:30. Every half hour we add a bell when you're on watch on a ship. So they started this company, and they wanted to do environmental programming. This was a few years after Earth Day. This is how we roll, pollution. So Washington State is so hip and so groovy, they have a Department of Ecology. So for the Department of Ecology, they got the job to do this video, which they called Fabulous Wetlands. And they hired me, Bill Nye the Science Guy, to be the host. And Fabulous Wetlands was a turning point. You can see if you ever watch it, they still use it apparently just for kicks. Look at Bill Nye when he was 12 years old. So we did what we thought were just these innovative effects where I'd lie in the swamp and the camera guy, Mike Boydson, would walk along, and then I'd pop out of the water and just start talking, and water's coming out of my mouth, and it was hilarious. And it also had, by accident, I guess, or by like-minded individuals working toward a common goal, it had this fabulous thing that we now call learning objectives. It had 3 things that it was going to get across. And so those guys, Jim and Erin, being the way they are, lovers of television, lovers of Pee-wee's Playhouse. They said, we're going to make it Mr. Wizard meets Pee-wee's Playhouse. So you do the same thing over and over in as many different ways as you can think of. Wetlands filter water. They soak up floods, and they're home to wildlife. And they are, wetlands have about 50% of terrestrial species of animals and plants that live on land depend at some point on wetlands. And it's in Washington State, it's a huge deal. So you can show, if you're a land use planner, that it's actually cheaper to leave the wetland in place than try to drain it and pave it and use it for other purposes. Actually, when it does rain in Washington State, you come out way behind because this hardscape surface ends up flooded and you can't use it anyway. And so it was a different way of looking at the environment. Anyway, that was a turning point. We did that. That was a big hit. Then we did this thing for stream keepers, and then Jim and Aaron started going around the country pitching the Bill Nye the Science Guy show. And I would too. I remember making sketches for this guy, Rick Blangiardi, very nice guy who was the station manager at this point. And this, we're going to do this, we're going to go over here and do this. Then these guys in Portland, Oregon said, why don't you just try it? And I did, and it was no good. It was so then I realized, I guess we all three realized we had to work together, Jim, Aaron, and I. And they got this deal with the Department of Energy. And the guy at that time, the head of the Department of Energy, I guess he's called the administrator of the Department of Energy, was Rick Stevens. And he really believed in education. And the Department of Energy to this day has tremendous an issue with the pipeline, with getting young engineers and scientists to come work for them who can get security clearance. U.S. citizens who can get security clearance, because although it's called the Department of Energy, it's kind of the Department of Nuclear Materials Energy. And so they have a lot of security issues. Anyway, Rick Stevens really believed in it, and so he gave us $100,000, which in 1991 was a chunk of change. And then the National Science Foundation got wind of this, and they gave us $100,000. So then we had enough money to do a pilot. So we did. And this year, 2012, by one reasonable reckoning, is the 20th anniversary of the Science Guy show. So you could say it's next spring, like a year from now, but it's about now. And we did a pilot about the water cycle, which had learning objectives, and it was very successful. My agent at that time, you know, when you work on a comedy show and you're trying to get someplace and you send out videotapes all the time, I ended up with an agent in LA. The guy said, okay, okay, I'll keep your name, and we had Post-it notes in those days, I guess. And his girlfriend, before she was his wife, watched the show and said, you got to support this. This is going to be great. She was a fourth grade teacher. And so that's the story anyway. So then we got a deal with PBS, and then another turning point, Buena Vista Television stepped in, Disney, and said, we're going to fund this. We're going to give you a lot of money. And so we did 26 shows. We did 20 shows, then we did 26 shows, then we did 39. And this thing with public broadcasting, they don't do, or in those days, they didn't do the traditional 13 at a time. It was just how they rolled.
Where did it air? It was airing nationally, but different
Yeah,
times,
so the story goes that the Science Guy show was on more stations than Regis and Kathy Lee. And even last night, David Letterman was doing jokes about Regis Philbin. I mean, even last night, still going.
Now, how, in those early days, if you had to say to somebody, this is the show, how do you describe the show? How did you, and sort of how
Well,
do you?
Jim and Aaron were better at it than I was, but it was Pee Wee Herman meets Mr. Wizard. So we were going to do elementary science demonstrations, elementary science, in a rapid-fire way. And the premise is you, the viewer, are watching television, and you have a remote control. But today, every station that you flip to is about wetlands or dinosaurs or buoyancy. and then or probability. And so we did 100 shows, and Jim and Aaron also just had a gift or the ability to hire very energetic, very well-suited young people. So we had a really young staff, and we just did whatever we kind of wanted within this fabulous framework. And so when you have learning objectives, it helps you leave things out. And to this day, I go to meetings about television shows, and people just don't want to take the time to figure, and it reminds me so much of engineering. People don't want to take the time up front to get it organized. And I say this all the time. This is making navigation systems for business jets. It's making logging equipment or navigation equipment for oil wells. Nobody wants to build what I call the second prototype. Like, you kind of throw something together, then you got to really like make it work. Then you got to try to make it work that one more time. Nobody wants to do that. Let's just get started. Let's just get started. Let's just go. Let's just go. Let's go. Let's get started. And then you end up chasing your tail.
When you were, I mean, in the early stages and you went along, how did you decide what the audience was? Did you tailor to a certain
that's
audience?
a great question. That is a great question. So we had the benefit of outstanding research. So after we got this deal with public broadcasting, there was a woman there named Elizabeth Brock, who now works in public broadcasting in Alabama, of all things. But she had this discipline. This is a classic example. Do you know the Washington Nationals? It's 2012. You got the older manager with the younger players. That's a great formula. So she insisted that everybody take the time to figure out what we're going to do. So we had a big conference on the Bechtel campus in Seattle. It's part of, I guess it's adjacent to the University of Washington. And you got to focus on people 10 years old. 10 years old is the oldest you can be to get the so-called lifelong passion for science. And I think it's probably the oldest you can be to get the lifelong passion for anything. And I say this, ask your physician, your doctor, when did you want to be a scientist? When did you want to be a doctor? He or she'll say, I was 7 years old and my uncle took a lizard apart, or whatever it is. And this is very compelling. If it's not 10, it's 9. If it's not 9, it's 11. But it ain't 17. That's it. By the time people are in high school, they're cooked. You're not going to be able to influence them. So that's why the show was aimed at people nominally in 4th grade or 10 years old. But that turned out to be a pretty good level for everybody. You know, half the viewers were grown-ups. So,
how swift was the reaction to it? And I assume it was demographically, it was across the board. But what were you noticing? How swiftly and what kind of people?
Well, it's kids of all ages, I guess is the expression, and many, many teachers. I mean, I still, in storage, I have boxes and boxes of letters. And it just thrilling. It make you cry. Fantastic letters of people very supportive of the idea of the show. And so what I'll claim is that you never talk down to the viewer. The viewer is another scientist, and we're just having a chat. You may not have seen this, that the mass of the water that the hull of the ship displaces weighs as much as the ship. You may not have noticed that, but check this out. So show, then tell. You show, then you tell. Discipline and vocabulary, DIV, as I say. You have to avoid using words that the audience won't understand until you explain it. You have to explain, in my opinion, you explain it, then you show them the word. Then you tell them the word. Because there's a lot of power in words. I mean, echolocation is a great word, but if you don't know that you can locate things with echoes, it's confusing. So this is the trouble with teaching. This is the trouble with pedagogy. It is not rocket surgery. Wait, rocket science. It's a discipline. And so educators fight this all the time. I now, in my job, I'll meet the world's foremost rocket scientists, the best in the world. I will meet Nobel laureates. most of these Nobel, not most, none of these Nobel laureates would be a good kindergarten teacher. I mean, it's a different skill. And so you got to respect that, everybody.
Now, how did you define the look, by the way? Especially, I mean, the bow ties were sort of legendary. How did that come about, and the coat?
Oh, yeah. Well, the very first Science Guy ever, I was wearing a straight tie. It may interest you to know. Because I wore a tie every day. In those days, it was sort of the end of an era. Engineers wore ties to work. And because you were a white-collared worker, and this was how you rolled. So I used to have a Harris tweed jacket, penny loafers, khakis, and a tie. And I worked on a drawing board as a drafter, as a designer. So I would tuck my tie in my shirt, and this was, a cool thing to do because you were cool. And it's cool, you're an engineer. So when I was in high school, we had, I guess we still do have, the girls' athletic banquet. So at the girls' athletic banquet, the boys are the waiters on the girls. So this is where they win for lacrosse, field hockey, gymnastics, and so on. It's very cool. So I said to the guys, if we're going to be waiters, we should look like waiters, so let's wear a bow tie. Now, I was a very good Boy Scout. My dad was a very good Scout. And I could tie a lot of knots. I still can tie knots. I still spend time making sure I have my knot proficiency going. I still tie knots once in a while. So he showed me how to tie a bow tie during Perry Mason, the show Perry Mason, which we were watching reruns even then. And the key, if you ever want to do this, you tie it around your leg. This part of your leg is not that different from the diameter of your neck. So you tie it over and over, and then you do it in a mirror. Then now I'm to the point where it's hard to use a mirror because it throws you off a little bit. It's just better to do it without even looking. So what I found was the bow tie does not flip into your flask. The bow tie does not slip into your soup. So it's very practical. So I started wearing them, and then you get to a point where that's all you want to wear. And here it's still going. So it goes back to high school for me.
And it became like the look. I mean,
it's the look, yeah. And they really are. They have a feature. It's not perfect, but if you're a man or a guy, a tie dresses you up. I mean, this is important. And so Jerry Seinfeld used to come through Seattle on his way up before he was mega, mega huge. And he was the best of the comedians that would come through. This is in those days, Swanee's Comedy Underground, still there. And he was just really, really good. And you'd go, then the other guy, us lesser people, would have breakfast with him on Sunday morning. And he says, you want to look like a headline. You want to dress better than the audience, or at least as well as the audience. And this goes back. You look at the Rat Pack, they're in tuxedos every night. So when you wear a tie, you're just more dressed up. There's a lot to that. Nowadays, you go to JPL, Jet Propulsion Lab, nobody wears a tie. Head guy doesn't. He'll wear a tie when the boss comes. Charlie Bolden comes, but most of the time.
Now, in selecting, you said 100 shows. How many shows
100
did you do? And how did you come up with the topics for
Well, that was
these?
a lot of work. So we had a curriculum consultant, Susan Wood, and she was a teacher, and she would comb the current thinking on pedagogy, on methods of teaching. And we would use the big states. We'd use Texas, Florida, California. We'd use their standards and sift through them. And I'll, if you want, I'll give you a document which we call the Rules of the Road. And it says right there, our objective is to change the world, and we'd like school curricula to follow us. In other words, we'll do stuff so compelling, so cool, that everybody will want to use it in their curricula, and they do. I mean, I got to say, just being objective, people use the show to teach, which is great. It was made for television, for commercials, to entertain you, but it is very gratifying. So we've spent a lot of time picking topics. Now, there's a little bit of discipline in that. There's life science and physical science, biology, physics, and chemistry. then and this goes back to Carl Sagan, I coined the expression, or I embraced the idea of planetary science. So the Earth is a planet. To many, the moon is a planet, but the planets, moons, comets, meteors, stars, that's all planetary science. And so every third show is one of those three topics. And then within that, every other planetary science show is about the Earth. Every other physical science show is about either physics or chemistry. Every other life science show is about general biology or the human body. Turns out people of all ages are fascinated with their bodies. And so of the three topics, there are then 6 subtopics, or 2 each. So over those 100 shows, you'll see that arrangement. And I've tried to explain that to people, and it's not an accident, you guys. We gave it a lot of thought. So.
What were some of the most popular, the ones you would get the most feedback for, the episodes?
Well, people like dinosaurs. People of all ages like the dinosaur show. The buoyancy show was the number 3 show, but for some reason we just had it dialed in. I remember by the 3rd show we got it going on. And people like Food Web. But the other one that's very popular is the paranormal, the pseudoscience, the pseudoscience show, about how you fool yourself, about how people make it look like they're ghosts, but they're no ghosts, and make it look like they're UFOs, or rather alien spacecraft, but there aren't any. And that's a very popular show among science educators. And the probability show is popular, where we had a single red styrofoam peanut buried in millions of other styrofoam peanuts, and then you had to pay $1 to get every styrofoam peanut. You'd probably lose. You would not make money on that. And it just sort of drives it home. I did an ad for the Washington State lottery as a young actor starting out. And I got to say, I was naive. I thought Washington State, when I first got there, there's only 1 million people living there, like fewer than Studio City. And I thought the lottery would be fun. It's great for people. It's fun. But looking back, the lottery is, I don't think this is controversial, but the lottery brings in a lot of money for states. But it is effectively a tax on people who have not learned, we have not taught math. So in a sense, the state's responsible, by the state, I mean, the public school system's responsible for not educating people about how you always lose the lottery. And then we make money off those people with a lottery. So that was, looking back, that was just being a young person and a learning experience.
What were some of the rewarding examples? Because I'm curious, probably starting right away, you were getting feedback that would make you go, we're having success, we're doing well.
Oh, right away, yeah. I mean, when you watch your own show, or a show that, I'm the on-camera department, as I call it. I mean, we had 50 people working really hard to make this thing. And you start laughing at it, and the jokes are coming, you're laughing at it. You're onto something. And so right away, the response was very favorable. It took off.
So now you were hearing from school districts, and I'm curious about that, kind of seeing that you were affecting how people were learning.
Yeah, I still am, apparently. The people watch it in school who are 10 years old now. I mean, they were not alive when the show was made. So it's still, it's very gratifying. So I got a lot of letters. I got invited to a lot of events at which to speak. And even now, or most especially now, the people who watch the Science Guy show are in college. So I go to universities and colleges all the time and do talks. It's great.
How long did it take to do an individual episode, kind of from start to finish?
So, start to finish. Start to finish might have been 3 weeks. But it might have been more than that. So it was 9 days of shooting. So each show, on a given shoot day, we would do pieces from 2 or 3 or 4 shows. And we would schedule then a week and a half or 9 days to get the show shot. Then there's a week of offline editing, the editor sitting there assembling the shots. then a week of online of post-production, and then a week of audio. And one of the things I really look forward to is Thursday nights when I would do the couple words or lines that you couldn't hear because the waterfall was running, or voiceovers for certain sections. And that's when I would finally see the show, because you're so caught up as the guy on camera, you don't have time to go see what's happening in the edit bay or whatever. So those nights were really gratifying. And those guys, the audio guys, are just funny people. I'm sorry, they are just hilarious people. You watch the show without the Science Guy show without the sound effects. It's just not as good. Those guys just added so much. It's really, well, everybody did, but just those are people I could see and interact with. And Bad Animals, the name of the company, is still going strong in Seattle. The audio editors.
It's actually, speaking of audio, I was going to ask this before because it's my daughter's favorite, but the theme song, how did that come about, and can you still do it?
Well, I remind everybody, I don't sing the song. I don't sing it. I remind people, if everybody knows Gilligan's Island, even people who are not alive when the show was made. Gilligan doesn't sing the song. Frasier's the exception, where the Kelsey Grammer sang the song or something. Anyway, the guy who wrote it's named Mike Green. He has a company. Boy, I hope I don't mess this up. I think it's called 38 Fresh is the name of the company. And I saw him the other day, or a year ago, in Ralph's, the grocery store. And he's still producing. He's just a music producer. And Jim and Aaron they knew what they wanted, and they got it out of him, or he sold them on his vision or whatever. They worked together to make that song. It's really good. And I wasn't sure about having my lips being dubbed with a woman's voice. But Jim, he insisted, and he was right. He was absolutely right. It was good. It came out funny, well.
Now, we were talking about the ties, which is sort of a part of your real life, but how much of the Science Guy persona is Bill Nye as well? Are you guys one and the same, or are there different personas?
This is the blurse, the blessing and the curse of the Science Guy. Yeah, what you see is pretty much what you get. And but I will say, the guy on the show, like, he'll move his hands and stuff, and you hear kung fu swish noises. I don't do that. I can't do that. But that's pretty much the way I am, that show. And there's a couple things that are the blessing and the curse. That what makes you want to watch it is the guy is so passionate about what he's talking about. Me, the guy, I'm on camera, I'm so into the buoyancy, I'm so excited about the food web. I'm just thrilled that when you see how difficult it is to find the red styrofoam peanut in this big tub of styrofoam peanuts. I'm so excited to show you the volume of the sun that it's compelling. It makes you want to watch it. The curse is that people expect you to be like that all the time, and you can't. You just can't. It's exhausting. It takes a lot of energy. But I'm very proud of it, and I put my heart and soul into the thing. We all did. Everybody who worked on it just worked so hard.
And how many people you said were total?
Well, it depends. 60. So we had dozens and dozens of interns come through, and they did. They were working essentially for free, and they just did a great job, and they were well managed, and it was really good.
Okay, now you need to switch.